We're on?
It's a product of his environment.
This is class number 16. Class 16. I'm going to talk about the rest of these here, and I want you to know, I've really tried to lay a foundational understanding here, but there is a doctorate level class, an advanced certification class on this topic, and it will be far more extensive in this particular area, whereas this class was far more extensive in the foundational stuff, pornography, and dealing with the wife's issues and stuff. That's why we spent 3 days here. And then the stuff that I'm talking about here, these 8 points, will be far more extensive in the advanced class, dealing with the gender identity and same-sex attraction and stuff. But that's down the road. Okay, so I think I'm going to, for this class, I feel like it's probably, we're at the point where I'm going to give you some summary thoughts here and let you absorb what you've gotten instead of overwhelmed by doing another 5 hours on this topic, okay? Because I'm just watching y'all going, I don't know, I think we're about to that. I actually get asked to do counseling courses for other colleges. I've done a couple, and generally 12 50-minute sessions is all I get for a whole course. And so for us, I sometimes will go anywhere from 16 to 20 hours on a particular topic, you know. So these are just way more extensive anyway than the average counseling class is, generally speaking. Huh?
I don't feel so bad.
It's more extensive, it really is. But like I said, I will be teaching there is a whole nother course, and it's more just really zeroed in on this particular topic. But in this session, I'm going to talk about these last 7 topics, but I'm going to really summarize more than deep dive on them. All right? The second topic is labels. Now, this is really what Satan loves. He loves to label. He loves to put labels on people. One that stands out to me generally is the maniac of Gadara. And Jesus asked him his name, and he said, "My name is Legion, because we're many." And his identity was that, right? Demon possessed. That was the label everyone put on him, the maniac. We call him the maniac. And people love labels, and Satan loves to use sinful things for that purpose. And they really do, it's foundationally about identity. Labels are about identity. People struggle with identity. And who am I? What is my, how do I define myself, you know? And they pursue it. They look for some identity. And then they find some sinful behavior, and they make that part of their identity. Or they find some worldly thing, and they make it their identity, you know. And that becomes a problem, because they never really know who they are. They just know what they do or what they like maybe, but what you do and what you like isn't who you are. It may be the fruit of what you do, who you are. It may be the fruit of who you are, but it's not who you are. And everybody falls into this, by the way, lost and saved. I mean, believers fall into this. Preachers fall into this trap. Preachers, older preachers will say things like, now that I can't preach anymore, who am I? Who am I? You know, that's who I am. I'm a preacher. That's who I am. No, that's what you did. There's a difference. You know, and it's not just preachers that have that trap. Lots of people do. Lots of people, they can't fathom. I mean, everyone talks about retirement, but when it comes right down to it, so many people's identities are wrapped up in what they do that it's like they don't even know who they are now. They're kind of lost. And because labels are so wrapped up into identity and so on, the idea of acceptance becomes very intertwined there. And so the idea of you either deny me as a person, if you say that my gender identity or my orientation is not valid, you're denying me as a person. And if you don't support, you either support me or you deny me. You understand? You can't say, I believe that that's wrong to do, because you're denying their personhood and their validity as an individual in their mind, because they've so tied their identity to this label. And this is a tactic Satan uses. And in a counseling situation, we have to help them to see that this is why Christian identity is not biblically based upon what we do, but rather upon the relationship we have with Christ, with God. And this is the problem with false religion, with religion itself, in a sense that it's saying, do these things and then you're a Christian. And therefore my identity still is based upon my doing. But I'm not a human doing. I'm a human being. So when we assign labels based upon doings, we reduce our existence down to our actions, and God elevates our existence beyond that. We are capable of spiritual fellowship with the Creator of all things. God is a spirit, and they that worship Him must worship Him in spirit and in truth, and we're capable of that, uniquely capable in all of creation. And I am a being, not just a doing. And I have to see that. In other words, a person, once they recognize the source of truth, needs to come to the point where they lift their eyes up on their own existence. They are greater than the things they have done. Their existence has value beyond what they do. My value does not come from what I've done. My value is intrinsic in the fact that my Creator made me. My value is based upon His assessment of me, not yours, and not even my own. And so when we talk about labels, we need to destroy the facade of labels, and we also need to establish the identity that's found in relationship with Christ, with God, and then the value that is created in that relationship as opposed to just our simple doings. Our righteousness is as filthy rags. That's our doings. It's minimal. My doings could never compare to to that of God. I can compare what I can do to what God can do. That's absurd, right? How meager our abilities are. So if it's based upon us, then, well, no wonder we have diminished view of our value, our worth, But when it's based upon the everlasting God, the creator of all the universe, who loved me and gave himself for me, now think about the value that's intrinsic in that, that's immeasurable, that he did that for me. So all that is, we could obviously talk for a lengthy period of time on those topics, but all that's inherent in the concept there of labels. The third topic there's destruction. That is the impact of sin, the activating events, if you will, and then thirdly, the progression of sin. So let me kind of approach, because that's three different things. First, a person's here for counseling because they have problems. People don't come in for counseling when there's not a problem, right? So the impact of sin, in theory, is comprehensible by the individual sitting in front of you, although there is the potential that they're only here because they've been forced to be here. That's also true in some counseling scenarios. But even in that state, it's reasonable then to consider that they're here because somebody has a problem with this scenario or situation that's created some impact on them, and they're being influenced and or impacted by the consequences of sin, whether it's theirs or that of others. And so there's the impact of sin, and of course, the discussion we have in the Restoration Road book concerning sin, and that it is by choice, and that sin is in the world, and we're all affected by sin in the world, going back to the starting dynamic that we began this whole class with, the aloneness dynamic. And in there you have on the left side, of course, the impact that on us, because sin is in the world, and then on the alternate side, the impact of us, our sinful responses, right? And so in this topic, yeah, you have it right there. In this particular topic, the destruction, this is where I would really begin and explain the aloneness dynamic there, and then get into the emotional pain side of things, because while there are many that are obviously involved in a social contagion we talked about earlier tonight, there's also the reality that along with sin does come traumatic experiences that impact us, right? And influence us. And so that would be what we might call the roots of the issue that people experience. But the activating events, where does it start? Remember, foundationally, if you haven't taken Life Issues Discipleship, Lid 1, then you'll need to take that. But 1, 2, 3, and 4, I guess. We discuss in there how the question to understand portion of counseling, the inception of counseling, the beginning portion of counseling, uses a basic formula to come to comprehension for our understanding, and that formula is the A plus B equals C. Activating event plus belief equals consequence, right? And we understand that the activating event never causes the problem, never causes the consequence. It's always belief that causes the consequence. And because the same event can happen to two people and have two different outcomes, but the outcome is based upon their belief system. So when the event happens, their beliefs kick in, and then they react a certain way, and that produces the consequence. So that is that link between this idea of the impact of sin, that would be the consequence, the activating event, and then the progression of sin would be how this belief brought us to the point we are. Okay. We understand this, that sin is progressive. Because we have a tendency to find less pleasure in something the more we have engaged in it. In order for the brain to achieve the same amount of pleasure, or the amount of pleasure it desires, it necessarily escalates the behavior. If you've never read it, I would encourage you to read the book Atomic Habits. Not a Christian book. It's not written by a Christian. I say that, I mean, it's not written from a Christian perspective, at least. I don't know if he is a Christian or not, but it's an excellent book that explains the dopamine cycle. And in relationship to habits and behavior, there's a ton of excellent quotes in the book. And so I would highly recommend that you read the book or listen to it. But read it because it'd be better to have a copy of it, because there's charts and things in there too. So,
Yeah.
essentially, and I'm not going to draw this properly. I don't recall all the details of it off the top of my head as far as the exact ways in which the cycle goes like this. But basically, you'd have cycle 1 would be your stimulus, your response, all right, and then your reward, and then there's a fourth thing out here, and I can't remember all. Anyway, but basically it's like in the first cycle, like you experience the stimulus and then the response, and then there's the dopamine cycle and so forth like that. And then as it progresses, what happens is that dopamine spike moves earlier in the process until it literally happens at the stimulus, and then it does this. This is drug addiction and pornography. Then it does this. Where, for instance, an addict can be like about to die, and they get $40, and immediately they're like, woo! And they're literally getting that dopamine spike back here before they even take the drugs. And then over time, what happens is it creates like higher highs and lower lows, and that's why they have to take more and more drugs to get the same effect, but they actually never do. That's what they're chasing, is the same effect, but they're not getting the same effect. And that's true with pornography. That's why someone would progress in pornography to looking at, just crazy fetish, weird, or just things, child porn and stuff like that even, because they can't get the same impact that they had initially. Now, I really do encourage you to read that book because it really does a great job explaining this. Okay. So sin is progressive in that fashion, and so it really does bring about a magnified impact of sin in time, right? And a person needs to see, much like when we, in the anthropology class, we talk about the Proverbs pendulum, it's something that they need to see here, that there is a pendulum both directions, and the consequences get more severe the further you push the pendulum one way, and you need to come to God's way. Come to faith on these things. So anyway, so there's destruction. That's really on what the sin is actually doing in their life. And they think that it's helping them, but it's destroying them. Number 4 is design. And with a focus on how we were created. Now this is where, and I spent the first 2 hours, and I really kind of detailed a lot of the things that would be in this section out of Genesis chapter 1 and chapter 2 and chapter 3 and 4. Just the aspects of how we were created, male and female. One of the things that I think is important to take note of is that while male and female each have its own role, we talked about that side of it. What we didn't talk about is the side that male and female each have its own blessing. And what our culture has come to is this warped idea where a man is not supposed to enjoy the blessings of being a man. How dare you? Only women are allowed to become men and enjoy the blessings of being a man. And a woman is not supposed to enjoy the blessings of being a woman. Only a man who has become a woman can revel in the blessings of being a woman. That's how absurd it is. What it does, though, is it robs a person of the blessing of their creation. the odd thing, someone gets involved in, let's say, in same-sex relations, and it doesn't take away their desire to have a child. But they can't. You say, well, yeah, they can have a surrogate, but they have to use natural means. See, the unnatural means robs them of their ability. They have to resort to natural means in order to experience the blessing of fatherhood or motherhood. Think about that for a minute. They've been robbed of that blessing. There's a unique blessing for a lady that a man will never experience, to have that child in her womb and feel the growth of that child and all that. There's a blessing in that. There's a blessing as a mother breastfeeds her child, as she nurtures her child and holds it to her bosom, and there's uniqueness there. But similarly, there's blessings for a man. And those blessings are equal but distinct. But see, the gender confusion and orientation confusion and all this, it robs you of the blessings innate in your design. Saw an article, I think yesterday, about a young lady who's suing the doctors now for her gender transition surgery that happened some years ago, I guess. But one of the things that she now bemoans, she's detransitioned. Okay, she transitioned to a man and male figure. But it is kind of odd, though, isn't it? That a person is a man or a woman based on how they feel inside. If that's what makes you a man or woman, then why do you have to change the exterior to affirm the feeling? The feeling is a feeling, isn't it?
Sell the deception.
That's all it is. It's just selling a deception. But if they are already a man or a woman inside because they feel that way, then what difference does the outside make? Right? See, in other words, they don't even believe what they're saying. But this young lady had gender transition surgery. One of the things she bemoans now she's of childbearing age, she can never have children. Her breasts were removed. Her uterus was removed. She'll never be a mother. She was robbed of the blessing of her design by God, and she'll never be able to be that. And I'm going to tell you something. Not every woman can have children. And that's one of the false arguments that the leftists make. Well, not every woman can have children, therefore you're saying she's a failure. It's not an attack on her design in that sense that she can't have children. But I know this for a fact. A woman that can't have children struggles with that because it's a natural desire in her. It's part of nature. Unless it's mutilated and quenched by extreme abuse. And so there's a unique blessing in the design for both men and women that same-sex attraction and gender confusion robs people of. And one of the things they need to do is they need to embrace the uniqueness, the unique blessing of their design. because that's where you find the blessing. Right? Number 5, love. When you look at Scripture, you find a contrast in Galatians chapter number 5, verse number 19. He says, the works of the flesh are manifest, which are these: adultery, uncleanness, adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lasciviousness. Those 4 words, adultery, fornication, we know those are sexual sin. Uncleanness and lasciviousness are also sexual sin. They are the pursuit of carnal lust. And all 4 of those words actually are foundationally, they are lust, fulfillment of the lust appetite. But the works of the flesh in Galatians 5:19 are contrasted later in verse number 22 with the fruit of the Spirit. See, this is the contrast. And you can lay these out. You can lay them out side by side like this. And you can say, okay, the fruit of the Spirit is love. And the works of the flesh are adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lasciviousness. These 4 things are what Satan tries to substitute for love. And they never satisfy. You pursue sexual gratification, for lack of better terminology, I guess, lustful indulgence, whether it's in pornography or whether it's in adultery and fornication and or whether it's in same-sex relationships or some other variation of what God intended, unnatural use of the body. Thinking that it's, and calling it love, and it's not love. And it never will be love. It'll never produce love. No matter how much you pursue it, it's not ever going to produce love. And it doesn't satiate the true need, and it is a need to be loved. But that's exactly what the world's offering. That's what Satan's offering. The flesh is offering these things as a substitute. And a person needs to understand what real love is. And let me say that I think a lot of times even Christians don't understand that. The Bible defines both what love is and what love does. But sometimes because we are prone toward wrong thinking, we tend toward defining love by what love does rather than what love is. 1 Corinthians 13 tells us what love does. It's patient, it's kind, it doesn't behave itself unseemly, seeketh not her own, is not easily provoked, rejoiceth not in iniquity, but rejoiceth in the truth, bears all things, believes all things, endures all things, hopes all things, right? Never fails. This is what love does. But what is love? Well, God is love. That's what the Bible says. And everyone that loveth is born of God and knoweth God, according to 1 John. He that loveth not knoweth not God, for God is love. Now you can't reverse that. You can't reverse it and say love is God. But you can understand that love is defined by God. God is love. Therefore, if God is absent, then true love is necessarily absent. That's what the Bible says, right? In order to have true love, you have to have the presence of God, because God is love. So you cannot have true biblical love without the presence of God. It's impossible. So a person has to know Him. And He has to dwell within them. And then we can see the evidence of love in that which we do, right? Greater love hath no man than this, than a man lay down his life for his friends. We can see the evidence of love in what God does. God so loved the world that He gave, but love that's what He did because of love. But what love is it's a part of His nature. And being a part of His nature, in order for love to be present, God must be present. Fortunately for even this lost world, God is omnipresent. So they see the evidence of the love of God, even, all around them. But then they reject it, And so they substitute adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lasciviousness as a fleshly substitute for the genuine, satisfying love of God. But you have to define it, because they don't know. They've been told that gratification of the flesh is the equivalent of love, and it's a confusion for them. All right, number 6, perspective. There has to be a resetting of worldview. And a person has to come to see things like God sees them. Now let me say this. In the Bible, there are eunuchs. There are eunuchs by birth. There are eunuchs by tragedy. And there are eunuchs by choice. And if you look at Matthew 19, you see that. Matthew 19, verse number 12, says, there are some eunuchs which were so born from their mother's womb. There are some eunuchs which were made eunuchs of men. Tragedy. And there are some eunuchs which have made themselves eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven's sake. He that's able to receive it, let him receive it. Now, eunuch is a state of being, but I would go back to saying, caution you concerning using the label, overusing the label in the sense of as a source of identity. Does that make sense? Because they're still a man or a woman. They're still a man or a woman, but they may be in the state of being a eunuch. That's not their identity. Do you get the difference between state of being and identity there? Watch out for labels. Illustrations in the Bible. Jesus lived the life of a eunuch. He never married. Paul lived the life of a eunuch. He was unmarried. Now, there's some that debate whether Paul possibly had been married. And some falsely use the argument that he was a member of the Sanhedrin. He wasn't. He worked for the Sanhedrin. He aspired to be a member of the Sanhedrin. But Paul himself says, I wish that all men were able to be as he was. You know, not everyone has the grace to do it. He chose to be single for the purpose of the ministry. There's nothing wrong with that if God gives someone grace to do so. Okay. But Paul specifically says it's better to marry than to burn. You know, 1 Corinthians chapter 7. So there is a perspective, though, in this to say someone, it's okay. In other words, in the biblical economy, it's okay for someone to say, I don't really have any desire to marry a woman or to marry a man. But it's not okay to say, I'm going to then do that which is unnatural. Does that make sense? So it's a perspective issue. Now, churches have messed this up to a certain extent, and in many ways, Bible college is almost the antithesis of the problem, and it creates more problems. It really does, and I know this is going to sound probably, it just is what it is. However, it doesn't matter how it sounds. It is what it is. A lot of Bible colleges have a lot of former students that are involved in unnatural lifestyles. But part of it is some of them had a genuine desire to walk and follow and serve God, and they got to Bible college and found out if they didn't get themselves a date and find themselves a spouse, that everything was geared around that, and they were punished and ridiculed and blackballed by and called out from the pulpits, and I'm not kidding. Am I right?
You are correct.
And it's like universal across them. We took Eternity to look at 2 colleges back when she wanted to do music. We don't offer music. And the first thing that was said when we got on campus of these 2 different Bible colleges, independent Baptist Bible colleges, the first thing that was said is, let us show you the dating room. Oh, we help people find spouses. Like, well, she wanted to come learn music. We're not interested in that. Oh, it's everyone. Get their MRS degree. And it's so pushed down the throat. And this idea that you can't be right with God unless you're married, that's not a biblical idea. Now, if you're married, it's God's will you stay married. Right? But not everyone has to be married. It's okay to choose just like Paul chose and others in the Scriptures. It's okay to just choose, I just want to focus on serving God and worshiping God and walking with God. There's nothing wrong with that. Now, it's not a mandate. Please, like the Catholic Church tries to make, mandates it. You know, if you're going to go into the ministry, you have to take a vow of celibacy. Well, there's no mandate in the Scriptures for something like that. But there's no mandate that a person has to get married either to be able to serve God. You understand? There is a qualification of a pastor and a deacon, but there's a reasonable assumption that the qualification has to do with more that if this then that, then it has to do with a requirement to such. Does that make sense? If you're married, then you need to be the husband of one wife. You can't have multiple wives. If you have children, your children need to be in subjection. Does that make sense? In other words, otherwise no one could ever become a pastor unless they were married and had children and deacons. You know, I mean, so there's a reasonableNess to the idea that it's an if this then that kind of part of the qualification. And there's going to be people that disagree with that, and that's fine. And I'm not saying every church needs to agree. I think a church is an independent body that needs to decide how they're going to follow in that vein. And there are sometimes variations that God allows within administration. There's differences in administration. The Bible says that in Corinthians. 1 Corinthians, I think, 14. But my point is this. There is no mandate that says every person that's born has to get married. But that type of thing is preached. If you don't get married, you're a queer, you're a homo, you're a this, you're a that. And if you don't have a date, you're a fag. I've heard people use that term. That's a vile term. Queer and all those things. And I mean, that's vile. But that type of stuff is spouted in pulpits. And it makes young people who maybe don't have a desire to get married, just want to serve and just serve God. It makes them feel like there's something wrong with them. And then you've got this crowd over here going, hey, there's nothing wrong with you. Come over here. We accept you. We accept you.
Yeah, that's it.
And now when they feel that, that's the only place they can find acceptance. Right? And so that's a problem. And so we have to learn a new perspective. And I'm not talking about a new perspective in the sense of we have to, I'm talking about as we're dealing with counseling, they need to see that, listen, other people not everyone is going to have a right perspective, but I'm responsible to have a right perspective. They need to have a resetting of the worldview as well, that it's okay, because a lot of them, if they've had any involvement in churches, a lot of them do get the idea that churches believe that if you don't want to get married, then that's what you are, because it's been said. Okay, and it's important to change that perspective, reset that worldview, see things like God sees them. We call that the fear of the Lord, right? All right, number 7. Image. As I change my perspective, I need to see that I need to be transformed into the image of God. Be transformed. Okay. Probably one of the biggest fears, and this is the interesting thing. The left presents a false dichotomy while accusing us of the same thing. In other words, they say, well, you just want to make them straight. That's what you want. You want to make them straight, and you want them to force them to get married in a straight relationship. But then they also say, well, gender's not binary. But in their construct, it is. You know what I'm saying? It's like it's all convoluted for them. It's not consistent. But I don't want to make someone straight. I just accept that they were made either a male or female by God.
Yes.
They can have natural desire or unnatural desire, but God doesn't accept unnatural desire. Is called sin. They can have natural relations or unnatural. They don't have to have intimate relations with people to be right with God. But they can't have unnatural relations and be right with God. And that goes for whether we're talking about pornography, adultery, fornication, or any other of these things. You understand? So it has nothing to do with making them straight. But they do need to come in alignment with the truth of the Word of God, that they're male or female. And that if they desire intimate relations, there's a natural and right biblical way, and then there's an unnatural and wrong and sinful way. You say, well, what if see, here's the problem. Because of indulgence in unnatural desires, it's like they do have to go through a resetting of their thinking and feelings and all that. And I can't do that for them. I mean, I'm being honest here. I can't do that. But here's the thing, I don't have to. Because God can. And I'm not saying God will make them desire to get married to a woman or something like that. I'm saying if that's what God desires for them and that's their desire, God can do what sin, He can undo, He can correct what sin destroys. He can restore. But that's not a program. That's not a program. Okay? That's just them just being conformed to the image of God. And then that brings us into number 8, which is presence, living in His presence and walking in His Spirit. And as we are in communion with Him, He transforms us. Not from gay to straight and from this to that. I'm just saying He transforms us into His image. Now, hold on to that thought. Into His what? Let us make man in our image, after our likeness. So God created man in His own image. In the image of God created He him, male and female created He them. If we're transformed into His image, that's where it starts. But that comes from abiding in His presence. So they have to learn to abide. You know what I mean by that? They just have to learn how to really walk with God, truly walk with God. Have that intimate personal relationship with Him. And I say this in marriage counseling. I think I said it earlier this week. If you're not finding fulfillment in Christ, you'll never find it in your spouse. Your spouse cannot fulfill you. Only God can fulfill you. And that's the truth, whether you're married or not. So the idea that I'm going to find some relationship that's going to fulfill me, that is a falsehood. Fulfillment comes from a right relationship with God. Why? Because then I'm not alone. And it's only that relationship that can cure aloneness. All right?
Why people jump person to person.
Yeah, of course. I think 16 hours in this class is going to be sufficient. We could have elaborated another 4 hours easily on the rest on those topics, but we do have another class that really delves deep into that, and so I'm going to leave that for that class. And so we'll stop there. 16 classes. Yes.
You talked about, I can't remember, I should have wrote it down, a list of something that you're going to, do you remember what that was?
Oh, yeah. We're gonna give us a list of,
Yeah. It's downloadable. They're talking about the self-focus. Hold on, Mark, when you stand up, I'm talking to this camera right up there. The self-focus, whatnot, should be downloadable from the screen, but I'll get you guys a copy of it. Let me remind everyone as we wrap up here then, the 3 things you need for this class. You need your class notes. If you're in class, you have to turn in your filled out notebook, okay? If you're not in class, you have to go through and fill out the notebook, but then you have to write a 2,500 word report overview of the workbook, and in that affirm that you did the work in the workbook. Okay? So you get 30% for your class notes, 30% for that, for this assignment, and then there's a test that's worth 40%, and you can schedule to take it. If you're online, you'll be able to take it right from the website right there.
Is that based on our notes, the test?
The test is based on the Restoration Road, actually. So
What was the test?
the test will be based on questions from here.
When is the test?
He said.
You can schedule to take it.
Oh. I missed that part.
Yep. All right? Okay. I say based on here, but it also has a couple questions from the Spouses Restoration Road. The 5 C's we covered.
Is that based
Yes,
on
sir.
our truth? Is that subjective?
We need to write something on your forehead there. If you wanna fail, yes. All right, we're dismissed.